Well, hi folks, and welcome to episode 174 of Retro Power Uncut. And we start with new project alert. I believe we've mentioned the Quattro a few times in the background. There's been design work going on in the background of things, which Cal will undoubtedly have touched on. However, we now have the car, the donor car, the beginnings of the project in the workshop, ready to start work on. It's been here for a little while. We had it here to scan, which again we mentioned before, but it's now about to undergo surgery, so that's why it's in here. We've literally just pulled it in about an hour and a half ago. We pulled it into the workshop. We removed the springs a while ago, so moving it is a bit challenging. We've made life a little bit difficult for ourselves, but we needed to adjust the ride height downwards, and that seemed to be the simplest way of doing it without putting too much time into parts that weren't going to be used. So it has no springs, which is why it's on skates and why we've done a bit of a challenge to get it onto the lift behind me. This is about to go onto the scissor lift behind me, and Bobby's going to start stripping this, and then I think Sam, once he's finished a job which we'll talk about in a minute, he's going to also get on to help Bobby get this stripped down. But yeah, that's the first phase, operation strip down. And then casting forward to next week, I'm going to set myself up for a fall here because this may or may not happen next week, but we've got an interesting trial process next week in that I've been wanting to trial an alternative way of removing seam sealer, under seal, and hopefully paint from body shells for a while. We currently media blast all the vehicles that we work on twice. We media blast them at the beginning, and then we do the metalwork, and then we blast them again at the end of metalwork. However, the initial blast blasting won't remove seam sealer and won't remove under seal. They're too rubbery, and so it won't remove them. So what we have done in the past is either used a pyrolysis oven, which is what the dipping companies use, or we've used a blowtorch and a scraper. We actually prefer the boat from a longevity of the final vehicle point of view. We actually prefer the blowtorch and scraper. However, it's really not a particularly nice process for the person doing it. It's pretty difficult to do in a sort of health and safety conscious fashion. It's just not a very nice process. And I've been pondering an alternative for a while, which is ultra high pressure water jetting, water jet blasting or hydro blasting. And not wet blasting, but hydro blasting, i.e. using water at very high pressure to remove the sealer. So hopefully next week, depending on many ducks falling in a row, we may be doing a trial on hydro blasting this body shell. This is something I'm quite excited about if it works. It's quite a commitment in that the equipment, we have to hire that equipment in. It's way beyond our means to purchase. It's an extremely expensive machine, the Hydroblaster. But I can hire one. We found a company in the Midlands that have one available for hire. So the plan is to try hydroblasting this and see how we get on. So I'm going to be doing that. Some nice waterproof overalls, and I've got myself some hydroblasting safety boots on order because I don't fancy cutting my feet off with it. And we'll see how it goes. That's operating at 1,000 bar water pressure, so it's 14,500 psi. So it's quite high pressure. So we're going to be we're on a steep learning curve. So hopefully that might be in the video next week. I don't know. It just depends on whether I can actually get the machine hired before we do the video next week. We shall see, and I can't commit to hiring the machine until the car is stripped down, because if I hire it and we're not ready for it, that's a big financial outlay wasted. So I've got to, there's a row of things that need to all fall into place before that can happen, but hopefully it will. Moving on from that, we will move over to the Interceptor, where I'm going to walk around to this side of it, I think, where Matt is very busy again. He's had his work cut out again by a different part of the car. The tailgate he's got finished, that's all done. Completely all finished, all to great satisfaction. That's a huge improvement. That was an enormous challenge, which he's done an incredibly good job of. It may as well have been for a different, putting it bluntly, it may as well have been for an entirely different car with how well it fitted initially. And with an enormous amount of reshaping and an enormous amount of lead work, he's now got all that to a perfect gap all the way round. Got that looking pretty much perfect, which considering where it started is no mean feat. He's then moved on to this side and run pretty much straight into the next, sort of headlong straight into the next challenge, which was actually before, he's actually at the easier stage now of actually putting the lead in it. The challenge prior to that was that the sides, we knew something was a little bit out down this side, but we hadn't actually noticed that the sill line, this flange on the sill, at the door at the B post actually kicked inboard quite markedly. There was actually quite a kick in the side of the car, and that had caused the quarter panel to be quite badly out of line. And Matt pointed out to me this morning that the only way to rectify that was going to be to unpick the outer sill from the inner sill, split it at the split the quarter panel where it meets the wheel arch, pull the sill out at the back to get it all back in line, then re-weld that, and then attack the lead work. He's also had to do quite a lot of, as is visible here, and as we mentioned the other side, he's had to do some hot shrinks in the quarter panel because the quarter panel was belled outwards quite markedly, and there wasn't really a way around that other than hot shrinking it. So he's done that. He's put a load of spot weld shrinks into that quarter panel, and he's now skimming very thin skim of lead over that area where those hot shrinks are to get that panel all completely flat again. It's one of those slightly tricky bits where you could panel beat the panel, you can planish the panel up to get rid of the indentations from the hot shrink. The problem is if you do panel beat the panel back, you put most of the stretch back into it that the hot shrinking took out. So you sort of end up juggling things a little bit there. So he'll have planished that to a reasonable extent, but then rather than going crazy on the planishing, you just smooth that off with lead and leave it at that. That you have to draw a line somewhere, and the line has to be drawn at the fact that you cannot planish that panel completely smooth without actually cutting a section of it out and refabricating it, just because there is slightly too much metal there. So he's making the best of that, and it's I've no doubt going to be a very nice job, because it was very similar to this area on the front wing that side, and that's come out extremely nice. So yeah, Matt's cracking on with that, and the finishing line's kind of almost in sight now. He's basically this side. We know the door is kind of somewhere near. Tom's done a pretty good job of getting the door all straight and nice and actually fitting the car. Stu's been working on the window frames, which are pretty close now. There's a little bit more work needed on them, but they're pretty close. So yeah, Matt's going to get the lead done on that. Lead work into the door, lead on the door shuts, and then this front wing finished, where he's got the shrinks put in, because again this was bulged out in both planes. So again, not much we could do about that other than hot shrink that to lose that extra material, which he's done, and then again there'll be a fine skim of lead over that just to get that finished. It's very small indentations from the hot shrinks, which you can then we'll then lead that to get that exactly right. I've referred a lot to hot shrink, and I think I have a feeling in a video at some point in the past I've explained the theory of that, but I'm not sure. There's actually a very good guide online somewhere by BOC on hot shrinking. It's more for structural steel work than it is for thin sheet steel, but the theory is basically that if you have a piece of steel and you heat a spot of it up, then if you say you heat an individual point, a spot, that spot will expand radially and will try and push the material away around it. If there's a crown in that panel, what it can do is just raise the crown. You'll actually see the panel bow up as you heat that spot and then come back. But what happens is, that particularly if you can constrain that panel flat, is that when you heat it, the material expands, and because it can't really go anywhere, it pushes into the material around it. Then when it cools, it actually finds it easier to pull the general area of the material to itself than to pull the material that had expanded into the sort of radial region back. It's quite hard to explain, but basically it's easier to pull the whole panel back than it is to pull the material back that has expanded into itself. And also, because of the heat application, it softens the material around the area of the application of heat, and again makes it easier for the expansion to push the excess material into that region. So basically you use the heat to push the material away, and then don't allow it to gradually pull it back. You make it pull the whole area back. And that's done a lot with, and a good example is on a bigger scale, shipbuilding. When the deck plates have been welded, the shrinkage from all the welds on the deck plates will pull the deck to all sorts of shapes on a boat. And what you'll tend to find is there'll be sort of baggy areas where in the deck plates where there's spare metal, And obviously you can't sort of, you're limited what you can do with sort of, well, I don't know what, 12, 16 mil thick steel plate on a deck of a ship. And so you may see there's videos on YouTube that you'll be able to find of the hot shrinking being done on steel deck plates. And have like a wheelbarrow, and these days a robot, with burner heads on it, with torches on it, that actually heat those deck plates up. And then the expansion and then subsequent shrinkage actually tightens that material up by causing it to shrink into itself and thicken. So that's the principle at play with the hot shrinking. Using a spot welder keeps that effect very constrained. So we heat a tiny spot, material expands fractionally and radially around it, probably constrained within about a 5 or 6 millimeter radius of the spot. It expands in that, and then as it cools and contracts, it pulls the material probably for maybe a 70 millimeter region is pulled tighter towards that spot. So once you do a number of those spots, it gradually shrinks that whole area and pulls the material tight and takes the bulge out of it. So that's what we're doing with hot shrinking. That's my little elaboration for today. Having told Jamie I wasn't going to go off on any tangents, there's today's tangent. There's a bonnet skin which we picked up from Martin Roby's earlier on today. So that also opens up another line of attack for Matt, which is to be able to do the lead work around the bonnet shut, and then also to fit the bonnet skin to the bonnet frame, which is leaning up against the wall over there, fit all that and be able to get this bit of a roll. There's a little bit of a roll on the edge of this panel again, like there was on the finished panel that was on the skin. We'll be able to do something about this roll on here when it's just a skin, whereas we can't do anything about it once it's attached to the frame. So that's why we're reskinning it, to be able to correct this detail around the edge that is impossible once it's on a frame. So that's where we're at with that. Ah, yes, totally forgot Stu. Poor Stu. Stu's been very busy with getting the transmission mounted. The transmission mount in the car, as it came to us, was woefully inadequate. It had a very limited amount of rubber in it. It was basically an industrial mounting that you would use to put an air compressor on the floor or something like that. So it was an anti-vibration mount, but under no circumstances would it have had enough anti-vibration properties for mounting a transmission in a car that's supposed to be reasonably refined to drive. So we wanted to review that, and we did. And the original plan was to use the mount that was designed to go onto this transmission originally, as it was in a 2015, 2016, I forgot what it is now. Yeah, it's a Mopar. I'm trying to remember what it is now. I think it's a Dodge Charger. It's either a Charger or a Challenger. I can't remember which now. I think it's a Charger that the transmission's from. And yeah, the plan was originally to use that mounting. So we got one of those mountings. However, it's too bulky. It's very, very hard to tell from pictures, and we haven't got any dimensions. Once we actually got the mount here, it's actually too bulky to fit in the space. So we abandoned that idea. An alternative idea was to go with the same donor, if you like, as we've used for the engine mounts, which is a very common Mercedes mounting. We've used the engine mounts that we've used are used in all manner of Mercedes, all the way up to AMG SL 55s, and I think it's used in the SL 600 as well. And interestingly, the transmission mounting is also I've basically used the same transmission mounting from those cars as well, and then Stu's made the mount to attach that to this to the Mopar application ZF 8HP transmission that we're using in this. So he's made that mounting. To that end, we've done some sketches, gone on to CAD, done a couple of CAD drawings. We did one CAD drawing just to evaluate the angles needed on the gussets to make the half of the mounting that bolts to the transmission, because there's a couple of included angles to allow for there. So a CAD drawing just was the easiest way to just work those angles out. And then we plasma cut the gussets for that, and Stu's turned up some pins, drilled and tapped those, welded those to the plate that bolts to the back of the transmission to make the transmission half of the mounting. And then for the actual mounting rail, if you like, or trough that bolts onto the chassis, he has come up with a nice sketch, and then we've drawn up in Fusion 360. We've drawn that as a sheet metal part in there. It's made from 4mm thick mild steel. Drawn that as a sheet metal part, unfolded it, CNC plasma cut the parts, and then Stu's bent them up and welded them all together. And we've come up with quite a nice design actually. It's quite compact, should be fairly refined. The mounting is suited to the sort of weight that it's got exerted on it by the engine and transmission in this car. It's very similar weight-wise to the application it would have seen in the Mercedes. And the Mercedes is quite refined as well. The Mercedes tend to run, certainly did in that era, I don't know now, but certainly in that era, did run quite soft mountings, probably a bit too soft if anything. But that's the way we're trying to err with this car, is trying to make it reasonably refined. That's the main aim of the car. It's not a racing car, it's not a track car, it is a GT car to be used to cover distance, not to be driven hugely hard around corners. So yeah, that's what Stu's been busy with, just beavering away on that. And then yes, also Jamie's reminding me things right, left and centre here. Also on the Interceptor, but distracting me because they're over the other side of the workshop. Sam has been modifying the exhaust manifolds. We had a clearance issue between the chassis and the engine mounts, and we've obviously remade the engine mounts. However, with the manifolds as they were, to make them avoid the engine mount would have increased the problem against the chassis. We were threading the needle with the engine mount, with the manifold between the engine mount and the chassis, and also between the floor and the manifold. So the best solution we could think of to solve that and get our clearances a little bit better was to slightly modify the exhaust manifolds. Obviously a slight modification to do it neatly actually ends up being quite a heavy modification. But basically one of the pipes kind of cut the corner on the manifold and ran quite closer than we would like to the engine mount. And it also looked a bit strange, to be honest. And the manifold made more sense if all four pipes were in kind of a square format as they came down and went under to the 4-into-1 collector. So Sam's modified the manifold, cut that runner out, that primary pipe out, and modified that primary pipe so that it follows the same path as the other four and hugs in nice and tight to those. And he's done a very nice job of that. We've actually just run out of argon on that machine, and rather than shuffling the bottles around, we're holding fire on getting another bottle of argon to finish the welding on that. So that's why they're not quite finished at the minute. In the meantime, we might as well walk that way actually, because Sam's now on with, we'll come back to the rest of the work on the Allegros, because Sam's actually working on the doors for the first Allegro, which were actually sent off to KS Composites to have the moulds taken for the door skins. So Sam's modifying these at the moment to put and as you can see here, to put the door speaker mountings in, and to put the electric window motor mounting into the door frame, and the central locking motor mounting, I think. That's right, isn't it? So yeah, he's getting the door inner frames all modified for that. He's done the first one, we've seen him put it up out of the way up there. He's getting the other mountings put in now, and then that's all four doors all ready to go for both cars. So yeah, we're progressing pretty well. We really are now at the stage where we desperately need the carbon fibre body panels. That's the point we're at now, is in fairly dire need of those. But also on the Allegro front is Bobby has been working on this car. We mentioned last week the air conditioning lines. He's just finished those off. He was pretty much there. He's just finished off getting those ready. He's been running the routing for the washer jets. He's made the cutouts in the scuttle for the washer jets. Originally, we were going to use some on-wiper arm jets. I think we've mentioned that previously. However, it turned out they looked a little bit oversized, a bit too big, really, for this application. These sort of slim 19s, early 70s style wiper blades. On a later blade, on a chunkier blade, they'd look quite good. On these, they just look too bulky. So we rewound that plan, and we've gone back to Range Rover Classic type washer jet that's readily available, that's really inconspicuous and small and sort of hides out of the way, and fitting those basically into the original holes in the scuttle. That then puts the pipes for the washer jets through into what is now the HVAC air intake plenum. This area now forms a closed plenum, just accessed through these hatches. So then the pipe work, Bobby's been doing the prep for the pipework run, putting the fastenings in and the clips in to run those pipes. They're going to come through the plenum, down, through into the engine bay, and then down, through the inner wing, and then they run along under the inner wing, along the side of the chassis rail and then come through to the screen wash pump on the side of the screen wash tank, just under the front corner here inside the wing there. We're using some plastic push-in clips to hold that on, so there's just holes down the chassis rail, avoids having any brackets or anything that's a problem for blasting and coating later. It's just a hole, it's very easy to pop the clips into later on. So yeah, Bobby's been getting that sorted out, and then as I say, he's now moved on. He's actually just been extending sorting out some wiring on our lift so that we've got a longer power cable for it, so it's a bit easier to move around because the cable was a bit too short on the lift really. So he's just done that, and then his next move is to get the Quattro onto the lift, as I think I said earlier. But yeah, that's pretty much, the other bit on the Allegro, sorry, before I get too sidetracked. On the Allegro, he's also been replicating the dashboard from the first car. With the prototype, everything we do here is a prototype effectively, but we did the prototype dashboard on car number 1, and then on car number 2, we are replicating that because it all seems to have gone quite well. So he's made the new dash tops, CNC plasmid those out, spot welded them in place, got them TIG welded together, made them all fit in the space that they've got to fit into, cut the original foam back on the top of the dash, and then fabricated the framework and the brackets that support the dash in the car and keep it all rigid and nice. There's a slight complication on this in that I think I mentioned previously that we were going to do a little exchange with Johnny Smith on his Allegro because he had said that he had a 2-clock dash in his car, which is partially correct. He did have a 2-clock. The plan was to do an exchange because we have a 4-clock dash. We have the posh dashboard in this car, and we didn't want the posh dash. We wanted the small, early Mark 1 2-clock binnacle, the narrow binnacle. So it turned out Johnny's car does indeed only have 2 actual clocks in the dash, but it is a 4-clock dash. It is the bigger, later dash. So that didn't actually help us, unfortunately. So we've gone back to the dash we had with the car, but we are modifying it, and we're actually going to, in fact, I think today Luke has scanned this dash and the one in that car, and then he's going to 3D print some infill pieces that basically narrow this pocket in the dash up to make it the same width as the dash in that car, which will enable us to then fit the smaller binnacle, which we're making from machined aluminium anyway. But basically, it will enable us to narrow this up neatly to fit the binnacle, and then we will use the same binnacle in both cars. The dash will all be retrimmed anyway. There'll be foam. This will be smoothed with foam from the edge of where this foam's cut off. This foam will be carried on over the top of the dash, and then everything will be smoothed off, and the whole dash is going to be leather trimmed anyway. So none of that, these infill pieces don't really matter. As long as they're all smoothed off, it'll all be leather trimmed anyway. Once everything's smoothed off, none of that will be noticeable, and the dashes will, to all intents and purposes, be the same. So that problem will have gone away. And then, at that point, one final Allegro thing, which is that Tom has been working on the floor pan repair that we've mentioned a number of times on this car, which we finally got around to doing, which is that this floor was in a bit of a poorly state and had got quite a lot of perforation and corrosion in it. So Tom has repaired that. I think last week we mentioned the inner section that he'd made there. This week he's made so far this week he's made the centre section and the front section. The centre section was done basically using the Pullmax to put the flutes in, and then hand beating this centre section with the drain hole into it. The front section I will hand over actually to Tom and let him explain how he's done that bit, because he made a bit of a nifty tool. So over to Tom. So
I've got to do this floor repair bit, and I've got all the beads in the floor, and we're trying to keep it original for the Allegro. I thought this bit would be complicated, chasing round and doing all that, so I've kind of come up with this idea. I've used it before on other things, but I wasn't sure if it would work on this. But basically a bit of 3mm, and got my ups, downs and all the rest of it. So theoretically, when I run this through the wheel, it will put the beads in for me, and I can just adjust the pressure until I do the last pass and it's all flat, and it'll all be, because it's quite intricate, I feel like this might be a better way of doing it. So we're going to give it a go, and it might go well, it might not. Let's instantly come out of that, tighten that up a bit. Bit more. So you can kind of see it's not quite flat yet, but it's sort of starting to put the lines in. So yeah, not quite there yet, but you can kind of see what we're going for. And then that will have like a fold line which will take out some of this distortion at the top. But yeah, saves a bit of time doing some intricate.
So thanks Tom, and that's that all done. We're pretty much there with the sheet metal fabrication on this, and then I think Tom's next move really on this is going to be getting onto the seam brazing. So we'll probably move this through into our blast room temporarily so that we've got some better fume extraction, because we have to burn the sealer out of the seams to be able to do the seam brazing. And all these Honda body shells have weld through seam sealer in all the seams, which stinks and is pretty unpleasant stuff to burn out. So we're going to do that in the blast room where we've got better extraction. So that'll be the next job on that. And then following that, we will move over to the body shop. And actually I'm just going to hand straight over to Mark there, because Mark did a little chat with you last week and made a nice job of explaining what he'd been up to on the Churchill project. So I'm going to hand over to Mark and he'll tell you what what's been going on in the body shop this week.
Hello viewers, welcome to this week's episode. This week I've said what I did last week, got onto the rotisserie, prepped all the underside where there's like little rough bits, sealer work all done, inside the arches, inside the rear arches, everywhere. I've prepped inside, sealer work all done, ready for the direct. Engine bay 3/4 of the way there, and then I can do the sealer work there. And then hopefully in the booth end of the week, hopefully get some direct in first. And then hopefully I'm going to try and raptor the underside, which will be body colour. And then I'm going to try and peel off the masking for the engine bay, colour that, bang a whole load of colour back over the Raptor, and then clear coat the lot, fingers crossed. And then hopefully back into here, finish the dry sanding on the outside, 800 wet flat now, all the rest of the car's sealed in, so I ain't got to worry about water getting onto bare metal. And yeah, heading that way for colour. And then we've had Gary working away on the E30. The carbon fibre panels are all now refaced, all over it. Now he's blocking it, starting with 120, working his way down all the way down to 180, and then it'll be epoxy primer, and then 320 block, then wet flat, and then we're virtually there for that, for colour. So loads of progress, as Nat would say. Okay, before we go, I'll just show you what we've been doing in the booth. Keep this open for Jamie. Into the crystal maze. Alright, so there's some more stuff for Churchill. Gloss directed the back plates. There's all the ball joints are all directed gloss. I think that's the brake pedal. Then over here we have in matte black, we have part of the gearbox, the inner middle section of the gearbox, which bolts to the bell housing, etc. Also with a bell housing plate here. And then we have the sump here. Well, these all three have been done in matte black direct. So they're all ready now to go back to assembly to get everything engine to be assembled, etc. And then yeah, that's it this week. See you next week.
So thank you, Mark. That's really good, thanks, and good explanation of what's going on in there. And it's just nice. This, it means I have less things for me to try and remember and forget copiously as I have done in this uncut episode that's now going to need various cuts in it. But on that note, on that bombshell, I'm going to hand over to Cal and let him explain and give you the tour of the assembly shop for this week.
Okay. Right, I'm back from my holidays. I think Nat probably mentioned last week I was at Retromobile in Paris, which is one of those car shows I suppose I've been wanting to tick off the bucket list, if you like, for a while now, and it was good. I must say that the sort of shine of your traditional format exhibition centre indoor car shows is wearing off a little bit now. But if you're going to pick one to go to, I think that would probably be the one, because the calibre of the cars there is just insane. Like I don't think I've ever seen so many high value, rare, exotic cars in one place. I mean, I hate to think of the value of cars that was in the place at one time. So yeah, it was great. Actually, it was great. I mean, it was probably, sort of half a day was probably the right amount of time to browse everything that was there and take it all in. So very different to something like SEMA, where realistically you need multiple days to take it all in. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I can see out of the corner of my eye, Tom is beavering away over there with the new, finishing basically the new router installation. I think what he's doing at the minute is installing the safety barrier light bars. So there's basically a light beam or laser beam from one bar to the other, and if you break that beam, it shuts the machine down. So he's just doing that last bit at the minute, and I think we have the first couple of jobs lined up for that, which is going to be largely interior based stuff. And actually this walk round I think is probably going to be largely interior focused. I'll probably just pause here for a minute actually, because we don't talk so much about the Redux M3 projects, and I think perhaps to the uninitiated or to people who aren't working on the car, you see the pictures of those cars and yes, it's a very nicely executed M3, but it's perhaps not immediately obvious the level of detail that's been executed on those, to the point where the vast majority of parts throughout the car are new made or designed parts. So as an example, all of the interior components were moulded from a reasonably good set that we made good on before the first build. So they're now in either carbon or fiberglass. So for instance, the door cards, the rear trim panels, I mean, there are so many pieces. We've got a big job list that Gibbo's working through now to basically trim and fettle all of the interior parts to get the fits of everything perfect. But it includes like the front section of the roof panel, the rear section, which is sort of exclusive to the M3, where they extended the back part of the roof, C-pillar trims, the parcel shelf, which is in two parts again because it's kind of the normal bit of parcel shelf, and then the M3 extension part. All of the under dash panels, the glove box we remade, and that was actually made in two halves, so that what we can do is, rather than when it's leathered, if you have the wrap round of the leather onto the inside, you obviously see that, and you've either got to do an incredibly complicated upholstery job with a seam around it, which is almost impossible to fit that on afterwards, and certainly impossible to make it look good. Or you've got to do what we've done, is basically make the glove box in two parts, so we can wrap the outer in leather, and then separately upholster the inner, and then attach the two together afterwards. So the wraparound on the inner and outer is basically hidden in the join between the two. Under dash panels, there's one just sat there. Essentially every interior panel is a newly made panel, and then we have to bring kind of upholsterability into mind. So originally on E30 door cards, it's kind of vinyl with like a heat joined fabric section in there. On these we're doing two different leathers, so there's a leather on the main part, and then the inner sort of insert of it is then a perforated leather, and the perforations are CNC perforated with the Redux logo on there. So to make that work from an upholstery point of view, neatness wise, we actually make the insert as a separate panel. So these are, we've got a CAD drawing we've done for these, so these are laser cut ABS plastic, and then the main part it gets cut out so that insert goes in, but rather than being a double layer all the way through, it saves a bit of weight, but the main reason for it is actually because where the door release handle goes, we don't want the bulk of two panels and all the wraparound of the leather as well, otherwise the handle wouldn't fit in there nicely. So it's all those little details of trying to work through the nicest way to fit it all, and obviously we've done the same door card clips on these inserts as the main panel is attached with. So again, they just pop into place. You can just clip those in. They've all been positioned so that where the clip sticks through is in one of the recessed parts of the metal door frame, so they don't get held off. So it's all those little details, and yeah, the job Gibbo's doing at the minute is just fettling all the edges to get essentially a 2mm allowance around everything, which allows for where the foam and the leather or Alcantara is wrapped around. So where all the different mating parts go, there's always a gap sufficient for that wraparound of material. And actually, that is something ties in quite well with something we're doing on the Escort. So we're very much into the interior phase on this now. I might have mentioned previously that we're planning on upholstering the roll cage, and we were trying to come up with a nice way to upholster around the awkward corners, because of course on the curves on the top of the cage it's much longer on the outside than the inside, so you can't just have a tube that wraps around it because it'll bunch up massively on the inside. So we've come up with the idea of doing separate corner pieces. I'm going to take a sip of this coffee, this Roundstone coffee. Pop it down over here somewhere, see? So yeah, Luke has scanned the cage now and drawn up these, which, as I was just saying about the allowance for material, basically have a 2mm allowance in the gap there, so we can wrap one side with leather, the other side with leather, wrap it around, and then when the two pieces mate up, it'll be perfectly round in here. And the idea is then that we can just upholster the straight sections of cage, so we'll literally have a piece that goes from here to here. That will be a rectangular piece of leather. The width of it is set by the circumference of the tube. And then there'll be a stitch line down each of the long sides of that rectangle. And then it'll be wrapped around and then hand stitched. And you basically, again, like doing a steering wheel, you hand stitch between the loops in the two rows of stitches to pull it all together. And we'll do that in wherever we think that stitch line looks neatest. And then it'll be separate pieces. So there'll be one piece there, one piece on that side, one piece on each of the verticals, one across the top. And then there'll be gaps on the actual corners. And then these upholstered finishing pieces will clip over afterwards and finish the corners neatly. So it's the first time we've ever done that. I'm hoping it turns out really well. Other upholstery stuff on this, Dean came over at the weekend, dropped off all of the main carpet sections that he's now edged, so they're sitting over here. A couple of different techniques used on this actually. Most of it has been edge whipped, as you call it, so it goes into a machine with a yarn feed into it, which basically just has a needle that goes through and it just spins around and around and binds that edge, same way you would do edge binding on like a stair carpet and that kind of thing. It can't do very, very tight internal corners. Now we don't have many of them. There are a couple where the seat brackets are. So on there we've just stitched in some charcoal Alcantara because that's in an area which is covered by the seat anyway. So although it's not an absolute perfect match cosmetically for the edge whipping, it does a really neat job, and it's in an area where the colour match won't be an issue. So yeah, I'm kind of at the point where we can start getting some of those bits into place. I'm just waiting for Steve to finish off the last odds and ends of wiring. He's just doing the termination with a heated screen. Screen notable by the fact it has now been fitted. That means we can also get the wipers and washer jets and such on. But once he's buttoned up that last bit of wiring in there, we can actually start getting the carpets in. And then, excitingly, that means we can start getting some of the remaining interior bits in. And I've actually started doing some trial fitting now, and it's starting to really come together. You kind of have this vision in your head for so long, and you're so eager to show off the finished look, but it's sort of easy to get ahead of yourself and start putting bits in when you're not really ready to do that. But we are getting to the point where we'll start to get everything in place. But yes, Dean dropped off the centre console, which has been leathered. He dropped off the gear gaiter, handbrake gaiter, I think a couple of other bits as well. So yes, today I've just put the various machine components into that centre console. So that phone tray part at the front, the gear gaiter bezel, the little volume control, the Audison volume control at the back there. I'm just in the process of assembling the handbrake. So that's, again, multiple components have gone together in that handbrake assembly. We've done our own little acetal machined button on it, so it's black material so it doesn't scratch off like paint would on the push button. And then you've got the grip itself, I think that was another thing Dean actually dropped off at the weekend. That's a machined grip that we've made. It's been bronze anodised, and then Dean's wrapped that in a thinned leather. In fact, that's worth mentioning on the centre console as well, and on a lot of these complicated shaped leather wrapped parts, we have the leather thinned extremely thin. I think it's probably gone down to about 1/2 mil, or maybe slightly more than that, because it just means you get a lot less bunching up where the seams are. It conforms a lot better, there's a little bit more stretch in it. So if we're doing kind of complicated shapes, particularly if you're doing a dash, you really need the leather as thin as possible, just to avoid all of that extra bulk on the seams. So yeah, that's starting to look really, really cool. Like I'm just at that mega excited phase now where I can't see it, wait to see it all come together. I've just got to contain the excitement a bit and not get ahead of myself. I almost started putting the door cards on the other day and then remembered that we've got to bolt the mirrors on yet, and the mirrors are in the process of being machined, but they're not here yet. I think next week we should see the mirrors arrive, then I've got to get them anodised, painted, then we can bolt these in. So although the door cards are literally ready to go on now, all the door lock mechanisms are now done, the handles, this handle's in, I think that one's ready to go in. I've got to contain the excitement a little and not put them on because we're not quite ready for that yet. In the meantime, Alex has been working on the PDM programming, so he kind of uploaded his initial PDM map onto it, went through testing things, and that's, yeah, it's looking good. I don't think everything was 100% first time, but he's working through it, and I think things are certainly getting there. And it's always nice when you start seeing some of the functionality of the PDM come into play. So for instance, he's got it so when you blip the car open on the central locking, the indicators flash, that's controlled by the PDM. Headlights go on for a predetermined amount of time. Again, all controlled by the PDM, and you can sort of edit the parameters of that completely. So yeah, it's very exciting to see sort of the first sign of life in the car. I guess that's phase one, the electrical power up, and then phase two, when we get to the first engine power up, will be the full sort of life back into the car moment. Diffs are back. If you remember, we had leaks on the casings of both the diffs for both of the Escorts. They've been back to Quafe, the casings have been replaced, so we're ready to put those back in now. I haven't done it yet, they only arrived I think yesterday or the day before. One's just sat there, in fact, ready to go back in this. So yeah, I think things are in a position to take shape pretty quickly now. We'll get that diff in, we can get the rear window in now. Dean's just doing the very back section of parcel shelf that sits here. The main section's done. I think the main section's actually sitting on the back shelf of Kuma for the moment. And he's taken away all the boot carpets. So last week I think Gibbo was working on cutting all the sections for that. Dean's now taken those to do all the edge whipping for the boot carpets, which means we'll be in a kind of as soon as they're done, that's the boot can go together for the final time. As soon as we've just buttoned up the last bits of wiring under here, get the sound deadening in, get the carpet sections, which are all bound, they can go in, get the remaining upholstery panels in. As soon as the mirrors are here, door cards can go in. I'm waiting for the instrument binnacle to be machined, although I think that's nearly done. It's just waiting on the final operation, and then as soon as that's anodised, that can go in. So yeah, we're definitely light at the end of the tunnel on that. Kaiser, I think we previously showed we had a problem with wheel bearings on it, so we've now stripped and prepared new rear hub carriers for that, or replacement ones, and they've gone away to Simply Performance, and kind of made sense to do that because we were sending the rear end parts for Project Churchill. So Simply Performance are, I suppose, Jag specialists, but they're particularly well known for doing Jag rear end rebuilds. So for Project Churchill, we're sending them the diff, which is an S-type 3.77 to 1 limited slip Jag diff, and we're basically sending them the whole thing. So they'll just pull it apart, inspect everything, report back on what needs doing, rebuild it as new, and likewise on the hub carriers and the hubs, the wheel bearings on the rear hubs are shimmed for preload, and they're very experienced at doing those, so it kind of makes sense we've done the refurbishment of the parts, all the plating, blasting, preparing of everything, and then we're just going to send them the parts. They'll put new bearings in, set the preload right, and given that they were doing all that, it kind of made sense for them to have the rear hubs for Kaiser as well. So they literally left us today on a pallet, so hopefully a week or two from now we should have them back, which would be good. It'd be nice to get that rear end back into that and get that back over to its owner. Camaro, more continuation of the interior theme really. He's been working on the center console design for this. So we kind of roughed one out before. We've just been working on refining the design a little bit and just improving its upholsterability and machinability. And I mentioned about having a couple of jobs lined up for the CNC router. One of them I think will be some of the console for this. So it's a combination of a main structure, which we've got two possible routes on that. We could either 3D print it in sections and bond them all together and then leather it, or we could CNC it in some sort of high density foam, which would be my preference. And then there are two billet inlays that are going to be on that. One at the front with a gear shifter, 2 gauges, and then one further back with the phone charger, a little sort of tray for wallet or whatever. And there's a volume control in the front section, same Audison unit that we've used in the Escorts. So yeah, we were just literally looking earlier at where we could split the main console model to enable it to be machined on the router, because obviously it's a 3-axis machine, so we can't sort of do any kind of undercutting on it. But we think we've got a design where we can split it down the middle, which the 2 sections will be done separately potentially and bonded back together afterwards, and then do it hopefully in 2 operations. So it's going to be a bit of a learning process on that one, but we're reasonably confident. It may involve kind of machining it, tab machining it as they call it, which will be a bit of an interesting experiment in foam, because we'll have to leave quite large tabs on it. But tab machining is a method a lot of machinists use, where if you're doing aluminium, for instance, you have a massive billet of aluminium, you leave quite a big border around the part, and essentially you machine everything out from one side, you flip it, machine everything out from the other side, leaving the whole block clamped in. Because if you're trying to make a part that's very difficult to clamp, let's say it doesn't have any flat surfaces on it, and then at the very end you just machine smaller and smaller pieces that are still joining that part to the surrounding block, and then at the very end you just manually cut those through and file off the excess. And given that this part is going to be leathered, that is an option to us, that as long as we have a material that is stable enough to do that, we're going to have a whole block and essentially machine everything out from one side, flip it, attach it in the same fixture on the other side, machine everything out from the other side, but leaving some fairly large joining tabs, and just cut them through and file them off afterwards. So time will tell on that one. You will be joining us on our learning adventure with the CNC router. But certainly that console's going to look pretty spectacular. And Dean's just working on the seats for this. He's done the rear seat, and I think he's just doing the Recaros as well at the minute. So I'm really excited to see those come. Kind of see that it's got a really nice brown leathering its Porsche saddle, which looks amazing with this green. So excited to see that. What else? So the other thing that may be lined up for the router is what George is on with, or what he has been on with, which is he's going to be designing the egg crate book for the rear end of the E-Type, which is basically like an interlocking 2-dimensional profiles to create a sort of skeleton that can then be used as a checking jig for when the sheet metal work's being done for that. So I'm hoping that will be a really good one for the router as well, make that in MDF. He's then moved back onto the Quattro, so I don't know if Nat will have already mentioned, the Quattro is coming up now to actually start metalwork, so we're going to get that jigged, stripped, and sort of prepare that for the early stages of metalwork. One of the things we're going to be moving on to, or one of the things that will allow us to do, is unpick the rear quarter panels and do the scanning of the sort of mating faces for the rear quarters, because at the moment George has been working on the overview of the metalwork, but obviously the original exterior scan we had was of the existing panels. It still had quite a lot of glass and trims and stuff on it, so we'll be able to actually get the more detailed scans, which will allow him to then turn what is currently just models of the exterior shape and add in all of the sort of return edges and flanges and everything that will mount those panels onto the car itself, because they will be bonded carbon fibre panels, so the rear quarters will be bonded. The roof, undecided yet. If the roof's in good condition on the shell, we're thinking of leaving that steel, leaving the C-pillars steel, and there is originally a joint where the quarter panel mates up with the C-pillar behind a vent on the C-pillar, so that's where we would essentially replace the original quarter panel shape with carbon. The doors are going to remain the original shape, front wings are going to be carbon. So yeah, he's just in terms of the basic design, the basic shape, we're really happy. That's now been sort of sent over to the customer for him to give us a few pointers back, make sure we're all on the same page and we're all happy. Once we've done that additional scan work, he can finish designing the panels, and then in the meantime he's been working on the light design. So he'd just kind of thrown some model rear lights and rear section of the boot lid in. But what we're hoping to do to sort of mimic the LED matrix design we're doing on the front side lights is to do the rear in a similar fashion. So the shape of the rear lights will be as per original Quattro, but within that will be kind of little square matrix LEDs, and potentially the same in a band running across the bottom of the boot lid, where I think on some of them it might have said Quattro or Coupe or something, which then gives us a few options. I mean, we could go crazy with this and have kind of scrolling indicators and various other things we could do with it. Whether we get that carried away, I don't know, but certainly it gives us the visual we want, and it gives us the possibility of doing some quite cool stuff with the lighting on it. So he's on with that. And I think actually that probably covers everything. Yeah, I've taken myself by surprise there, but I think that has covered it all. So I'll see you again next week. Oh, and I should add, if you've got any questions you want to ask, because we always look through comments to see if there's any questions so we can answer them, but then I always forget to say, if you've got a question, put it in the comments. So if you've got a question, put it in the comments and we'll try and answer it next week.